Now let's talk a little bit about how we organize Agile teams and those key Agile release train roles. What problem are we solving? If we're thinking about changing the definition of a team, and we are, why? Well, the problem we have is that if we're organized this way, the business is the business. We can't argue with that. Systems engineering, gosh, that's a pretty solid discipline. In a way, we don't mind it if they hang out together. Hardware, let's just pick software over here and let's just pick software test. Makes sense that they work together, doesn't it? That's the way we're organized. We're not stupid, We didn't create these things just so that somebody could say, hey, we've siloed the organization. We're not dumb about it. Well, what's the problem? The problem is that value doesn't flow that way. Nobody buys, I'd like to buy a bunch of your system engineering, or, hey, ship me some of that untested software. I'd really like to have, I'll buy that stuff. No, value happens this way. Value happens down here. So the problem is that while it's logical, it's not helpful, and it doesn't create the flow that we need across those value streams. So our silos, or our vertical functional organizations, if you will, to use a less pejorative term, are optimized for vertical communication. They're optimized for the ability to communicate that way. They're not optimized for the ability to communicate this way. And is there friction? Well, of course there's friction, because these are functional barriers. They have different bosses and sometimes different walls and different cultures and sometimes in different geographic locations, occasionally different languages. So it's not such an easy thing to get value to flow across. It bounces and bounces and bounces and has a lot of friction involved in the process. And our location is typically via functions. You're pretty unlikely to have people oriented for where all your software engineers are co-located with hardware engineers, because it wasn't the way you thought about the problem. It's not the way you problem solved earlier for organization. So you see location via function rather than co-location. And of course, politics can play a role too, because people care about their teams. You can't blame a manager for saying, hey, I've got 100 testers and they're important to me. I have responsibility for their career growth. Yes, you do. We also have responsibility to figure out better and better ways to deliver systems. So instead of that, we think about it differently, and we think about, let's rethink a team, and let's make sure that the teams themselves work the way the value wants to flow. If I have an idea and I need to instantiate the idea and a feature a story, let's get organized to do that. Do we have to make organizational changes? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they're virtual. Typically at the team level, you do see those organizations change. At the art level, some do, some don't. Over time, they largely do. So our cross-functional teams can do different work. They can't just, code something. They can define, build, and test a feature or component, depending on how they're organized. That's a full value proposition. That means that we can figure out what it needs to do. We can build it and we test it. We don't need centralized capabilities for any of those things. We can do it all. We can define, build, and test and deliver some value at the end of this period. What are they optimized for? They're optimized for communication and delivery of value. They're not optimized for one developer to talk to another developer on another Agile release train. That's not a bad thing. That's why we have communities of practice. But they're optimized for the ability to communicate about the thing of value, not about the practice or the discipline, but about the thing. And what do? As we mentioned, they deliver value every 2 weeks. Most of these teams run Scrum. Some run XP, some Kanban, and some a hybrid, but probably 80 or 90% of the enterprises that have rolled out Agile at scale use Scrum. We apply those Scrum roles because, frankly, we need them. The Scrum Master, pretty important construct, runs the team meetings and helps drive Agile behavior, removes impediments, protects the team from outside influence, attends the Scrum and Scrum meetings. It has additional responsibilities to really run an effective Scrum process. The Scrum Master is our management proxy. Can that be a manager? Well, shockingly, yes, it can. Is that always the best choice? Well, if I'm a manager and I'm trying to manage a lot and build a lot of value, and I'm also the Scrum Master, I'm now deeply engaged in the operation of that team. So I can't manage across or can't manage up. So it's not our favorite choice to have a manager operate as a Scrum Master, and most savvy managers will say, hey, with this model, I think I can manage more, not less, and I just need someone on the team that's my proxy that can help get a purchase order done, remove an impediment, help enforce the rules of Scrum. There are very few rules, but they're important roles, and we need that role. Does a Kanban team have a Scrum Master? Not clear. Not always. Some do, some don't. However, what about the product owner? This is a critical role. If we look at the left side of the Scaled Agile framework, you see product management, you see product owner, you see solution management, all the way up to the portfolio. You see the fact that in order to operate effectively, we need decentralized decision-making. And decentralized decision-making with respect to what we build falls on the product owner at the team level. And that person has a critical set of responsibilities, including they define and accept user stories. They own the backlog, if you will. The Scrum Master is a facilitative servant leader that helps get things done. The product owner understands what needs to be done. They have a foot in engineering and a foot in the customer space, so they're educated and trained to understand what the right thing to do for the customer is. They act as the customer for developer questions. We talked about the manifesto. Business people work daily with the team. Well, how is that possible? My customer is miles away, large organization, rarely has the time of day. Well, I'm going to need to have a proxy for that. I'm going to need to have somebody that absolutely can go to the customer, because I can't have, let's say, even my team of 9, can I have 5 developers each asking the customer every day? That doesn't really make sense. And what's more, if they did, they're going to get slightly 5 different points of view. So we need a product owner to integrate that thinking and to create one common view for what the team is building. What's the interaction with the business? Well, mostly in SAFe, that's with product management. So they work with product management to plan the PIs. So now we have a connection between the team itself and the product owner. The team's going to be right here, and the Scrum Master and the team, but we also have a connection here between the product owner and the product manager, and we'll talk about that shortly as well. And what about the team? What do they do? Well, I already said it. They create and refine user stories and acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria is essentially a verbal statement of the test case. It might even be an automated statement of the test case that says, yeah, that user story does what we thought what it was going to do. Product owner can write user stories, but are they the only one? Well, I would hope not, or you'll backlog yourself pretty quickly. The team can define, build, and test user stories. They can work with the product owner to say, what do you think about this one? The product owner owns the backlog. They have the final call if there's a discussion or debate about exactly how the system's supposed to do. So we know who to go to if we can't agree or have multiple ideas, but we're fully capable of doing that. This team here can deliver value. That's what makes an Agile team an Agile team. It's not a step in a workflow. It's not a step in a value stream. It's the ability within the value stream to create an idea and turn that into reality. And develop and commit to the team PI objectives and iteration plans. And that's what they do. We'll talk more about those objectives and how important they are, but only the team can make any commitment to their work. We're not going to commit for them. They're going to commit to what they can do, and they commit in the context of planning as well. There's much discussion, if you will, in the industry about whether or not teams should commit, or whether that really means they've signed up for a bag of stuff they don't understand. SAFe is commitment-based. We believe that if we allow the teams and the trains to do their planning, that it's reasonable to ask for a short-term commitment. Not what we're going to build in a year. Nobody knows that, no matter what we think as managers. But at least in the next 2 weeks, can we commit to a course of action? How about in the next 3 or 4 or 5 iterations for this PI? So we'll discuss the process of committing to larger objectives in the next module. So we take that same basic discussion about what cross-functional means and we extend it to really outside a team. So we'd say, okay, well, the business owner, the real business owner, not the product owner proxy, not the person that's going to speak for that person, the real business owner, they can't really participate necessarily every day, but they can be part of the team. And maybe this is systems architecture, systems engineering. Maybe I have a group of them. Well, this is a single thing we're building. Who can speak for that? What about the PMO? We'll talk later about the PMO. Does that still exist? Well, different opinions on that. But in general, it's good to have a common way of working across multiple arts. So it's not unlikely that our release train engineer here is really a representative of the program office. Or maybe they report directly into engineering. Frankly, that doesn't matter as much as whether or not the culture of the company is supporting a paradigm of servant leadership here and lean and agile and continuous delivery and development here. The teams themselves, well, should we only have the mechanical teams together? Well, it doesn't work without the optics, and none of that works without the software. And what about testing? So we bring all of those resources together into this adhocracy, this maybe virtual, maybe actually organizational agile release train. And now we really have the people that can define, build, and test a big thing, fully capable of delivering that solution to market without a lot of assistance because they have feedback from the business. They have input from architecture, engineering. They know that this thing can be deployed or not. Maybe this is DevOps, or maybe it's a widget with software in it. Well, those folks are part of our solution too. So we're completely cross-functional. And now we've pivoted from our vertical organization to a set of horizontal organizations Whether you evolve the organization and the line reporting that way is up to you. But there's no question that this pivot, this right turn here, this 90-degree pivot to align towards value is the fundamental construct of Agile and certainly the fundamental construct at the art level of SAFe. Now, how do we organize those teams? We need to think a little bit about component teams and feature teams because it's always a good discussion and a bit of a debate in the industry. What we want to do is to make sure that we're optimizing for the thing that matters. We want to maximize the velocity. We want to minimize dependencies and handoffs and sustain architectural robustness and system qualities. We want to do both. So we want to minimize handoffs and also sustain the system qualities. So the two basic mechanisms, there are certainly more, but these are the two biggest ones that people think about. They think about features of the system, and most Agilists would go, oh, that's the right way to organize. That makes great sense, and we largely agree, but I want to talk about some caveats as well. Or potentially organized around components. We see other kinds of teams as well, but really want to kind of minimize that. So, you know, a middleware team, they exist, and it's not the end of the world. But wouldn't it be better if they had additional ability to provide additional value? So we see those teams, and they're not necessarily bad because that's the way the architecture is, and typically you might also have specific distinctive competences associated with those, but not nearly as desirable as these two. And we see others as well. I mean, if you let the teams get together, they'll pick their spoken language because the communication, of course, is much higher there. Well, if their communication around their spoken language is great, but they don't have capabilities across the system, that's not going to be as good either. So the main leaning is towards feature teams, but component teams can do a job as well. Let's talk about that a second. So what's the recommendation? Our recommendation is pretty simple. We lean to feature teams. Why? Because there's less dependencies. They can deliver value. A feature by definition delivers value. A component, it delivers value, but it's not end user value. And yet, there's some mixes. The feature teams, why? Absolutely fastest velocity. Minimize dependencies, they can deliver an entire feature. They'll start to develop their T skills. It won't just be, I have the skill in this area, but I'm a Java dev and I can write automated tests, or I'm a Java dev and I can write automated tests and I'm learning a little bit about Python. Or generally I can start to expand my skills because my skills are whatever I need to do to build the feature. With the feature as the focus, I want my skills to be oriented towards the ability to create those features. Component teams, well, they should go away because we're all virtual and value doesn't flow around components. Well, guess what? It's simply not that simple. Let me give you an example. So let's just say an industrial controls company is building thermostats, and they want to have a high degree of platform commonality across the thermostats. So they have a bunch of thermostats, and they all are complicated and programmable, and they have good UIs, etc. And gosh, wouldn't it be convenient if they all run Java? The answer is yes, it would be convenient if they all run Java. But there are different types from, they serve maybe different industries or different elements of the same industry. Well, where's the JVM? Where's the Java virtual machine here? Should each team say, I'll create my own JVM and basically determine the features and functionalities of the JVM that I build? I think that would be a bit silly. Wouldn't it make more sense if somebody said, we'll take care of the JVM, you all use that. So instead of having 5 teams create individual Java virtual machines, one team, let's have this team create that. Let's let them maintain that, and let's build a great JVM. So there are plenty of cases, real-world cases, where components make a lot of sense, and you can drive additional technical specialization. In weird cases, maybe securities trading, or maybe algorithms for determining various pathologies based upon a data set or whatever. And then it's also for critical NFRs. We had a case where a trading company, transaction processing time for an individual stock trade was a really big deal. It went into the box and it got traded. If you transacted late, you would end up transacting at a price that wasn't current when you started the transaction. So there's many cases where component teams tend to make sense. The only thing to worry about here is that let's understand what a component is. A component has a definition. It's a potentially replaceable part of the system. That's what makes a component, but it has well-defined interfaces. Well, it has to have well-defined interfaces to be potentially replaceable. So it's okay that this team builds our Java virtual machine, but it has to have interfaces. It can't be bound into the actual runtime of each application. implementation. It's got to behave in a well-formed manner. So features versus component teams, we tend to think of it as both and make sure that we make good judicious decisions about when this makes sense versus when that makes sense. And as we mentioned earlier, when you organize around architectural layers, that's going to seem pretty logical, but boy, that's really tough, because that means is that any feature, imagine that these were architectural layers. This is the front-end team, here's the business logic, here's the middleware, here's the database, here's the data warehouse. So they're not feature teams now, they're component teams now. In order to get something done, I have to light up every team. Hey, everybody help me do one thing, all because I'm organized around layers. So there's no good separation of concerns technically to do it that way, and instead I have the lack of any form of vertical velocity. So generally that's the least desirable arrangement. Even then, there are exceptions. In the end, it depends, right? But we want it to depend on a well-thought construct that says if it's a component, then it has certain types of behavior. If not, let's lean towards feature teams. Those aren't the only roles on the train. You've seen pictures before, and we'll talk about these very briefly. If you wanted to know more about what a release train engineer does, what would you do? You go to the website and click, and you'd come up with a list of responsibilities that they have. But this release train engineer is really the chief scrum master for the train, the person that runs Scrum of Scrums, runs the PI planning session, etc. Other roles contribute. Product management owns and defines, prioritizes program backlog. They're a fractal above the product owner. System architect / engineering, that's an aggregated term because sometimes they're solution architects and system architects, and other times they're systems engineers, but we know what their responsibility is. We need them to provide the architectural governance we need and thereby technical enablement to keep to the teams on the train. The system team provides process and tools to integrate and evaluate assets early and often. You don't have a system team, but I won't go back a few slides, but if I did and you looked at that slide that said, there's a bunch of teams working together, probably on different technology, different parts of the technology stack. Who can integrate that? Can any one team integrate across 4 different platforms for which they don't even manage environments or have environments? Probably not. So the system team provides that capability. And by the way, if your teams can fully integrate, please let them. You don't need a system team, but in most large arts, a system team is a couple of people, and maybe it's as big as 10 or 15 people that can do what nobody else can do, which is they can bring the entire solution together and integrate it and evaluate it, and they can also support various processes and tools. They can lead the way in test automation or help upgrade the continuous integration environment. Business owners are key stakeholders on the train. Who are they? Well, you can answer that question backwards. When a team creates a set of plans, who are the people that if they said, given the constraints of the system, those are great plans and I support them, who would they be? Okay, well, they could be anybody. They could be a VP or a director, could be a security guy, a product management. It's almost always part of the business owner team. Could be the guy from the data center. The woman here that runs the data center who's got 300 people doing, ETL work on the data, and she's really concerned about the tools they have. It can be whichever stakeholders you need to create such that you know that you have the executives and management at their back. It's an over-constrained situation. Everybody would like to do more with less. The teams would too, but in the end, it comes down to what can be accomplished, and we need a group of people that say, I'll back these guys up. I'm part of that team. When we talk about lean agile budgeting down the road, we're going to talk about the fact that this is absolutely key. You can't just allocate money to a value stream and turn your back. But if the business owners are part of that, and they're the ones that consume the stuff, then you basically have integrated the business owner in development, in which case you haven't turned your back at all. You've provided and allowed for their responsibility to continue to update and modify the backlog and provide feedback. There are other potential roles on the train as well that I'm not going to go through, but those are the biggies. These have to be there. You have to have release train engineer, product management, virtually always system architect, not always, virtually always system team, not always, but always business owners, the key stakeholders that can determine whether our train is doing its job or not. Product management and product owner, let's talk a little bit about that. So the program backlog, who owns the vision of what's getting built? Well, Ms. Product Manager here, she does. So I'm just going to draw this as our backlog, and she says that we're good to do this, and she knows that. How does she know? Because A, she's empowered to know. She has the time to be outdoors and to learn things from the outside. She has the ear of executive management that has the ultimate fiduciary responsibility, and they're jointly determining with her what the backlog should be. Well, from a team standpoint, that's good for me. If that's what the infusion pump has to do to meet its clinical trials, I'm fine with that. I don't need to think that I have the authority to redefine, the appropriate granularity of infusion rate for a clinical drug that we've never had to infuse before. What's the fan out? Well, if we have many teams, let's just say 8 or 10 teams, okay, how am I going to support all those product owners? Well, it's really pretty hard. And what we've discovered is typically you can support, a few for sure. What does that mean if there's, as I indicated here, there's 11 teams on this train? It probably means that I have multiple product managers, maybe a director of product management, maybe an assistant director, or maybe a product line manager, or someone who has responsibility for that set. So you'll typically see in an art more than one person as the PM if it's a big art. If it's a small art, 4 teams, then you're largely good to go. Well, let's take the other side of that. How many teams can a product owner support? Well, there's certainly opinions in the industry on that. We have one, which is that after 2, it starts to break down. So in a large team, it's really good if you can have a dedicated product owner working solely on understanding what gets built. If we did a, kind of analysis of how much time we spend coding versus how much time we spend to figure out what to code, the figuring out what to code is really a labor-intensive part, and typically takes longer than just the coding part. So dedicating someone to that role makes total sense. After supporting 2 teams, then they can't get their questions answered. Then your stuff stacks up as unaccepted. Then you tend to waterfall the sprint if for no other reason than the product owner wasn't available until the last day of the sprint. So what does that mean? They look at all those stories and they go, we don't like that one, don't like that one, this one's good. And now what do we got? We've got deferred risk, deferred late discovery inside a 2-week sprint. Well, that's no good. So we need tighter support than that. You can build your own. There are other opinions as to how this fan out works, but SAFE opines, that's part of what we do. If you don't like the opinions, we respect that. Probably not every opinion in there is the right opinion in your context, but at least we have patterns that have illustrated to us that this is about as far as you can go. And that means that if you're designing a new solution, you know how to design. If it's a 5-train art, no big deal. 1 product manager, 2 or 3 product owners. If it's a 13-train art, then it's a whole different matter. But this canonical form is the building blocks for us, the content authority building blocks for us that connect the business to the team this way. Another just opinion that I'm happy to throw out because I certainly have them. I'm known for that. My opinion is that the product owner is part of that team. If they report into the business, it's not terrible. We see it all the time. They report into marketing. What does that mean? It means that their loyalties are different than their loyalties. Well, there's always going to be tension between the business and technology. Let's not put the tension there. Let's do this. Let's have the product owner be integral to the team, along with the Scrum Master and the team. If there's tension between the business and technology, let's have these folks handle it, such that at least we haven't split the team in the middle with that fundamental kind of separation of concerns. The team is the team and will work as an extended team of teams. There's another team at work here as well, which is this team, the extended product owner and product manager team. Now you can see why we think product owners are so important. They help the team have autonomy, and they help make sure that we align the team to the needs of the business by working with product management. So at scale, a single person can't do all of that, and we need some people that are dedicated to that particular mission.